we have seen these scores drop to among the lowest in the nation. And no one is talking about it. Certainly Janet Mills is not talking about it. Where is the press conference on the State House steps saying that this is a calamity that we need to address? It's a national humiliation that we've plunged like this. I don't see any action.
Yeah.
From the classroom in Maine to leading education reform nationwide, Stephen Bowen now serves as Executive Director of the Hoover Education Success Initiative.
When you look at where we were, in the 90s, in those days, we were at the top. I mean, we routinely ranked among the top for states in the nation. And since then, it would be interesting to get a sense of the degree to which we have stood still and other states have passed us. There's probably something to that.
Yeah. The administration put out a big study called Measure What Matters. In Measure What Matters, the consulting firm that wrote this thing says that because of AI and modern technology, reading and math is not as important.
Yeah.
But it blew my mind. I mean, when you have a large language model telling you what to think and you don't have basic logic, what is the most basic element of logic? It's math, right? Or the ability to form a sentence, that terrified me.
Yeah.
What's the top page of that governor's playbook where education in Maine is concerned? What is the single biggest urgent fix if you were advising the next governor?
The first thing,
So we last were together at that coffee shop in Camden. And I came over on my boat and came up the hill, and we got our little place in the corner, and you pulled out this piece of paper, and it was a line going up and a line going out. I have it. I just couldn't find it for this. It was the cost per pupil and the reading and math scores and you had an inflation adjuster in there. And then you had the reading and math. You had one for 4th and one for 8th grade, the NAEP, the sort of standard federal test that everyone uses to benchmark. And they were shooting apart in a giant maw. What do you make of that?
Well, it's deeply concerning. We spent a lot of time nationally looking at states and sort of seeing which state is where. And when you look at where we were, in the 90s, when the sort of accountability and testing movement really took off sort of nationally, Nation at Risk, came out in the 80s. It really pushed the standards and accountability assessment movement into the 80s and 90s. And in those days, we were at the top. I mean, we routinely ranked among the top for states in the nation. And since then, it would be interesting to get a sense of the degree to which we have stood still and other states have passed us. There's probably something to that. I know the challenge that I ran into both when I was in the legislature and then when I was the state chief in the early 2000s is we would come in and say, look, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. And the sense we got even then, even by the early 2000s, was there's nothing wrong with our schools. What's the problem? We're top ranked. We're doing just fine. We don't need to do what others are doing. So that sense was pretty pervasive. And I think it formed some barriers to some of the things that we wanted to try to do. And now, looking back at it from more than a decade and seeing what some of these other states have done, it's pretty clear we're getting lapped by states that, frankly, we used to look down our nose at, like Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee. I mean, these states are really doing some remarkable work.
So I noticed our number one year was 92, and 92, Jock McKernan was governor. So I dug up Jock McKernan. He's alive and well. He's still in Falmouth. He's handsome as ever. And he had lunch with me. And I said, look at these numbers. What were you doing? What was going on? He said, he said, everything that I've seen happen in government that goes well gets scope creep. He said, when we were doing this, he said, to me, I didn't even focus on reading and math and fourth grade. He said, I focused on reading in 3rd grade. And he said, I really knew the teachers knew in 2nd grade. They knew which kids were not going to make it. If you weren't reading in 2nd grade, you were already, by the time you got to that fourth grade, it's really hard. And then all the other things, the kids that were making trouble in class that might need social service and everything, overwhelmingly, they're ones that couldn't read. And so they couldn't engage in what was going on in the class. And so they engaged themselves otherwise. Did you witness that kind of, what do you think of that scope creep concept?
Well, I think certainly that's an issue that we're dealing with. And there's a big disagreement nationally, I think, around this question of what schools need to do for kids to be successful. And, the current administration here in Maine has adopted a kind of whole child, whole school kind of approach where we need to provide all of these services and we need to do all of these wraparound things and we need to focus on all of these other indicators. And academics is like a tiny little slice of that. And you see there are states that are doing this and they're creating these big complicated dashboards with all these indicators of student well-being. And that's not to say that student well-being isn't important, but the states that we are seeing that have gained ground, Louisiana and Mississippi are the only two states that have returned in either math or reading to their pre-COVID levels on the NAEP score. So those states are doing something. And what those states are doing is to the conversation that you had with Governor McKernan, like just a laser focus on those pieces, those key literacy pieces, aligning all of those, aligning standards, assessment, data gathering, curriculum, instructional materials, teacher training, professional development, ed schools. Like it's all aligned in a way that it's just laser focused. And then they've been able to continue that. The work that Mississippi's done dates back to, when Kerry Wright first became commissioner there, 2013 or so. And they just stayed at it year after year after year and continued to refine and make those pieces work. And other states have followed their lead. And that's why you see the Alabamas and the Tennessees and these other states following this really focused effort. And they are just keeping their eye on the ball. And I think there's a case to be made that I don't know what this administration thinks is the most important thing for schools to be doing.
Well, we've I don't know if you've seen the study that the administration put out a big study called Measure What Matters. And in Measure What Matters, in the preamble, the consulting firm that wrote this thing says that because of AI and modern technology, reading and math is not as important. Which made me, blew my mind. I mean, when you have a large language model telling you what to think and you don't have basic logic, what is the most basic element of logic? It's math, right? Or the ability to form a sentence, that terrified me. But also it seemed, as you described, to cover lots and lots and lots of things that are unimpeachably good, but that you might not touch if you couldn't teach kids to read.
Right. Well, and we've just stacked this up. I'll show you. I think I might have mentioned this to you when we were together, but I didn't bring this to show you. So somewhere along the line, I managed to find this. This is the laws of Maine related to public schools from 1895. It's 30 pages. It's 30 pages. Okay. So this is 1895. I'll send it to you. This is my state statute book for education, Title 20A. This is from the 2020 edition. It's 450 pages. So we've gone in just over 100 years from this to this, and I don't know what the end game is here. Are the kids going to be able to read when this is 700 pages thick? Like we seem to have lost the thread of what we're doing here. And look, I get that it's challenging, but there's got to be some type of return to basics here if we're going to get this thing turned around.
One of the topics that's come up in other areas of government, like family services, is kind of a tyranny of process over judgment. That in order for everybody to be protected, the administrators and the superintendents and there has to be a definition of good that can be sort of objectively shown. if you've done the following assessment and you've allowed the following opportunity and you've responded to the parents' email in the number of minutes, then you're good. Even if the kids can't read at the end, it seems. And is there a reverse? You're at the Hoover Institution. You're looking at school programming all over the country. You get the greatest AWACS kind of overflight of the battle to read that I think exists. And I'm watching this tyranny of process over judgment occur in government. Are you seeing any reversals? Are you seeing anybody saying, you know what, use your best judgment? No pages in the book. We trust you.
Well, I'll tell you, the Hoover Institution actually had I might have mentioned this to you, but we facilitated a kind of a working group advisory committee called the Education Futures Council last year. And it really grew from the Hoover director, Condoleezza Rice, passionate advocate for education. When I first went to Hoover, a couple of discussions with her, and her sort of questions like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? It's not working. And so we pulled this small group together and spent a year working with them. Like, surely there's another way we can do this. This is not working. And we use this like this. This is not working. We can't legislate our way to better schools endlessly. So what can we do? And we actually talked about this concept of flipping the system. Instead of this incessant top-down piece, can we build capacity at those lower levels and create a kind of bottom-up approach where you're sustaining, you're supporting innovation, you're doing some capacity building, you are trusting at the local level, but verifying, right? You still have data collection, you still have you still have clear standards. And we landed on this idea, which I thought was an intriguing one, which is this kind of earned autonomy model, right? So if you're a high performing school and you've got those scores where they need to be and you're trending in the right direction and you're sort of continuously improving, you should never get a phone call from the State Department of Education. Like you should lose our number over at the department, except the department should come once in a while and say, hey, we'd love to learn what you're doing here. Or we have a district.
We watch?
Yeah. Or we have a district like yours, same type of student population, same rural, whatever it might be. We'd like to match you up and have you guys spend some time with each other. So this district like yours can get a sense of what you guys are doing different. So we should be learning from those districts, but those districts otherwise should be left alone. That allows us to focus our efforts on the districts that are really struggling. And look, for those, you are going to have to say, okay, let's look at your curriculum materials. Here's the standards. Or do you have curriculum alignment? What are your assessments telling you? What kind of teacher training do you have? In the states like Mississippi that really crushed it on this, they did all of that. They built new assessments for early literacy. They put literacy coaches in high need schools. They aligned all the professional development. They went to the teacher prep programs and said, you need to be teaching these pieces around early literacy. So they did a kind of soup to nuts piece. And certainly, I think for our struggling districts, you're going to have to do that. But I think the ultimate goal is, you're right. We want to build capacity, capabilities at that local level so that they can go and execute. And I think that's what you see in the charter school world. Charter schools they're public schools. They're operated under a different set of regulations. They're given more flexibility, and they're schools of choice. So if parents don't appreciate what they're doing, they leave. So they face a unique, set of incentives to continuously improve. And a big charter school study at Stanford 2 years ago that my boss Mackie Raymond led found that over time, charter schools just continuously improve because they have flexibility and they have the right incentives to improve. And that's what we need to build, I think, more broadly.
Intuitively, I wonder whether not just the fact I used to drive an ambulance in New Orleans. Every school in New Orleans is now a charter school. They're all charter school. But I wonder whether even non-charter schools get better if they stand to lose kids to charter schools. That there's a consequence to lying on your belly and not, there's a consequence to not doing a good job, which is you're going to lose families.
Well, and that's what the school choice folks would say, that school choice is going to provide a competitive advantage. As you know, we have this really interesting model in Maine where we have the oldest school choice system in the country, but only in certain communities. Like I grew up in the town of Penobscot. When I was there, we had a grade 1-8 elementary school. We did not run a high school. And so I had choice. I could go to Bucksport. I could go to Blue Hill. I could go to Ellsworth. I could go to MPI. I could go wherever. So you do have choice in these certain regions. And when I was at the department, it was interesting to talk to superintendents in those regions. And they would as much as admit, look, we're trying to get kids here. Like, we have to tune our program, particularly at the high school level. That's where most of the choice was. But, and they had to figure out, how do we appeal to these families? What programs do they want? How do we demonstrate our excellence? They were forced to compete for kids from these outlying towns that didn't run their own high school. So we had like a miniature experiment right here in Maine around the school choice program that we have that's geographically based, which is unique. Other than us in Vermont, I don't think anybody else does it that way. But it formed an experiment. And I'm a school choice guy. I think if you created more choice opportunities, you'd create an incentive for schools, not to compete with each other necessarily, but to collaborate more, to figure out, why don't we take these kids? We can run a program for them. You guys can focus on those kids over there. We'll do a special career-oriented program at our school. You guys can do the college prep, science piece at your school. Like, you could see a model. And in their big districts like New York, where they have those kinds of choices, you see schools specialize. So there's a model there. But school choice has been a tough one to make any headway on in this state.
It's interesting, even charter schools, there's an elaborate charter school board and commission, but there's only 10 schools. And they're like it reminds me of the supermarket in North Korea that's always busy and stuff, but it's all actors in there,
Yeah.
Like, hey, we have a charter school,
Yeah.
but it's always the 10 and no one's allowed to go to them and you can't open a new one. What's going on there?
Well, I will take some responsibility. Well, I don't know how much responsibility I will take, but when we did the chart, when I was in the LePage administration, we got charter schools enacted. Even though the Republicans controlled the governor's mansion and both houses of the legislature, we could not get charter schools passed without votes from the Democratic side. We had rural Republicans primarily, who were concerned that folks were going to open charter schools in their rural communities and undermine their local rural schools. And so we had to get a bipartisan bill passed, and that required us to make some changes. So we had to put the cap in to get the bill passed. We had to put charter schools are under a much heavier sort of accountability framework than traditional public schools. That was part of that. And what's happened now under the Mills administration is they would very much like to get rid of charter schools. It's hard to do once the schools are there. It's hard to just pull the plug on all of them. But they are pursuing a sort of slow throttling of those schools, making it hard to open schools.
That's certainly what it looks like.
Yeah, adding more barriers for them to jump through. There's, I think, 3 vacant seats on the Charter School Commission. Charter School Commission can't get any attention. So the strategy of the Mills administration is benign neglect of the charter schools and the hope that they sort of wither. That's what the hope is. So I'm hopeful that a new administration will lean into that.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer. One of the things you touched on in there that I think is big in a rural state is a lot of towns are hanging on. Hospitals are closing, population's declining. We haven't rebuilt the economy that was, in these pulp towns, et cetera. So they think, geez, if the school dies, we die as a town. But I also hear about the school budgets. The upper line of your graph that you showed me in that restaurant. I've been talking to school board presidents and stuff. Most of the time, they describe the upper line as what they call non-faculty professionals. So it's a social worker or an occ health or that there's just and that group is growing, doing specialized services for specialized kids. And I can't help but wonder, particularly in a rural, is there a virtual reading specialist for kids with dyslexia that's way better than the part-time person who comes in and only deals with the 4 kids who have that, and starts to sort of sink that school with bloat, that's not scalable.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the virtual stuff, and how effective virtual, occupational therapy, physical therapy, behavioral issues. I'm not sure how. I don't know that I've seen studies. There may be studies on that. When in my time at the department, we were pushing for a regionalization solution. Like, why can't we do can't we do this regionally? So, we do career technical education regionally. Every school district feeds its CTE kids into a regional CTE center. I'll give John Baldacci some credit. When he was pushing the district consolidation piece, he said, let's just get down to the 27, 28 CTE regions and make those the districts. Why do we have to have so many districts? And he was right to a point. And that's tough because now you're going to get rid of all these school boards, and it really does feel like your schools are no longer yours. But what I worked on, because I was at Maine Heritage Policy Center then, was could we do a regionalization initiative where we could move back office operations, HR, IT, transportation,
these non-faculty
infrastructure, and just do those regionally. And you could do professional development for teachers regionally. You could do special ed services regionally. You could move some of those out so those folks could float. And that's, we don't have that model in this state in the way a lot of states do. A lot of states have these kind of regional entities that serve some of those functions that districts are a part of. I think it's something we should explore because you're right. I mean, I'm a proud graduate of Penobscot Elementary School. When I was there, and it was a K-8 school. There was probably 140, 150 kids in that school. There's 60 kids there now, and they've added a pre-K, right? So they've added a grade level, and they have half the kids that were there when I was there. So, we are going to confront some challenges of keeping these schools open going forward, because we're going to have sort of declining enrollment continuing as far as the eye can see, unless we get a sort of economic boom here and we get people moving into the state, young families.
That could make more pie, Steve.
We can make more pie. I mean, we could certainly see what
dividing the pie, make more pie.
Yeah. I mean, people are going to certain states and they're leaving other states to go there. So, there's certainly a solution there, but I don't know as much about the virtual. There may be, especially with AI coming online, there may be ways to do that really well, but at the very least, I think we can do more regional.
You could still have the in-person fellowship and community center, and you could use the school for all kinds of things to keep the community intact.
Sure.
But the 3 kids who need, and it could work for the kids who are struggling, but it could also work for the superstars. Little Joey here wants to do AP French. He's got French Canadian parents, and he's still got the language, and he wants to keep going. And there's nobody who knows enough French to teach him. Put him in a room with the same kind of Joeys from 20 other schools, and let him keep ripping. Because the other problem with it seems we run into it in Maine is a little bit of a disdain for excellence. Once a kid gets to a certain level, it's sort of not our problem. Because he's not a problem, as opposed to saying, well, geez, the kid who becomes the 1% of the 1%, that kid's going to run a business here. That kid's going to bring money here. That kid's going to be transformative in some way. And we should be all behind that kid. Win the spelling bee. Keep going, kid.
Well, and building specialized programs for those kids. And you're seeing, I mean, it boggles my mind that you are seeing in some of these cities and big school districts, the shutting down of magnet programs and those kinds of things, and I saw a little bit of it.
Gesture.
Yeah. I mean, I saw a little bit of it when I was at the department. I went up a couple of times to the Maine Science and Math Magnet School up in Limestone. And I remember talking to the leadership staff, and they said, look, you need to know, we have a hard time getting into high schools to recruit kids to come up here. Because the way what the districts were doing is like, I don't want to lose my top math student because my test scores, and if these 3 math students leave, my test scores will go down. I mean, it was just it was exceedingly frustrating that the state had gone ahead and created this opportunity for these math and science kids to go to a residential program. It was a great program. I loved going up there and hanging around with these kids, but there was this resistance to send kids there. If anything, we should have way more magnet schools. We should have a magnet school for the fine and performing arts. We should have we should create more of those specialized opportunities. And we used to have
reward the schools that develop kids for them.
Right. Yeah. And we could figure out the accountability structure related to that, but that we're going to prevent kids from accessing these opportunities for that seems ridiculous. We used to have something called AP for All, which was a virtual AP program that was taught by Maine teachers. It was designed to get AP programs into these rural schools, and the current administration killed it off. They decided to focus and sort of hand the whole thing to higher ed. I'm not sure how it works now, but it was a program that was it was a small program, but it was a program that was popular and allowed Maine teachers who were AP teachers to teach these kids from all over the state. It provided opportunity to AP classes. These kids are in these rural areas. It was a good program. And the administration just pulled the plug on it and decided they were going to focus on some other things.
Have you had any experience with a micro school model? So, we are rural, and, some of our smaller communities have hung together their school, but, it's K through 12 and it's 50 kids or whatever. But they seem to have the whole structure of a Maine school with a superintendent and a principal and I was actually on the board of a program that had a school, and I guess it was K through 6, one room, one teacher, very economical, but great results. It was called Chicken Coop School. I remember it vividly, and it was in an old chicken coop. And the tasks of daily living were part of the curriculum. All right, who's going to vacuum the chicken coop this morning? And have you seen models like that? More of like a
I think you're seeing. I think you're seeing those. As you know, a lot of these states have leaned heavily into school choice models and education savings accounts, which provide dollars right to families, so that those families can spend those dollars. And I think you're starting to see an emerging microschool movement. A lot of it, launched during COVID because these schools were closed. And so families just, let's get everybody in the cul-de-sac together and we'll hire a couple of teachers to come down here and teach these kids. And so out of a desperation, they figured out how to build these. I think you'll see more of those, but it's such an intriguing model. I think back to my dad who grew up in Hamden. And went to a one-room schoolhouse in Hamden and talked about, Mrs. Pinkham. I've heard this story a few times. Mrs. Pinkham milking her herd of cows before she came to school in the morning to teach the kids, and the outhouse out back and the whole thing. And he looks back on that experience with great fondness and thought when they closed those schools and built the consolidated school down in the village, that was one of the worst things that ever happened to him in his life. Now these farm kids all had to go down to this school. I was like, Dad, the school has running water. It's like science labs. Wasn't that better? Well, but he had been in this one room schoolhouse with families. They were in mixed grade levels, learning from each other. Like there is something, it's fascinating. We were coming full circle to some degree back to that one room schoolhouse model.
With technology and virtual stuff for the specialized expertise, I always took my kids, still do almost every year, to Eagle Island. The one room schoolhouse is still there. In fact, the desks are there. There's like a book. It's like frozen in time. And imagine if we were here, we lived on the farm and we came and it was a very romantic idea of school. And with the ability to bring in specialized, the problem, of course, of the one room school may not know math to the degree they need to, and science and environmental, blah, blah, blah. But if they can do good facilitation and good group work and good test administration, maybe there is a model where communities keep their schools and make them special if there's choice. And if there's choice, even if they're railroaded, you don't have to be everybody has to go to the one room, it could be only the people who want that experience.
And there's a change, there's a changing role for educators there too, which is not necessarily the deliverers of content, instructional content, although they may do some of that. But it's a changing part of the role will be, I need to use assessments to figure out where this kid is, what this kid needs today. And then I'm going to go out and find the instructional stuff that kid needs and plug it in. And I'm going to be sort of a facilitator of learning for these kids. And that's a different set of skills. And there are teachers who are not going to want to do that because they like to, and I get it. I don't know that I would like to do it. I like hanging with my kids and teaching them about the Romans and all that stuff that we used to do. But so I understand that. But there's certainly a different model there. And we're conducting a big experiment. These states that have passed education savings accounts, you're going to see these new school models spin up that parents are supporting. And hopefully we can learn something. I know my research colleagues at Hoover are trying to think through, like, how are we going to study whether ESAs work as a matter of public policy? They're not going to collect, data in the same way that schools do. So there's going to be a research challenge here, I think, to understand how this is working. But we're we're seeing states dive right in. So we'll see how it goes.
You'll one way or the other. I mean, I guess you'll be able to know. You'll know NAEP scores. There'll be some things that are held. I'm assuming that's being held constant, right?
Well, it depends on the state. And there are folks in the choice movement who are, they're true libertarians. They're like, just give the money to the families and let them do their thing. Trust the families. I think states have handled this differently. I think states. I want to give credit to Indiana, although don't quote me on this, that I think has made sure that there's an accountability provision that runs alongside that. It requires parents to, use some large scale assessment, something like that.
Yeah. The whole point of this was to meet a certain bar for citizenship. That's why we have public. It's the whole reason we kind of made everybody go. So I certainly hope we do some minimum bar, meet some minimum bar. So we've covered, consolidate them. We've covered virtualize them. We've covered making them smaller. What about the teachers themselves? What's gone on with teacher accountability, teacher evaluations? What works? What has Maine done? I heard that they've actually stopped a lot of teacher evaluations a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew. Again, I look at this administration and as sort of this black hole. I don't quite know what their. I look and I can't see sort of what their theory of action is. If we do these things, this is how student outcomes will result. I mean, we made a big push when I was there around teacher accountability and modernizing our accountability system. There were a lot of reports that came out in those days. This was a decade ago now, but around, the percent of teachers that were found to be highly effective by all of these teacher evaluation systems. So there's something, I mean, there has to be a piece related to that. I take the point of the teachers that teaching is a hard thing to assess, evaluate. It's one of those weird things where you and I could walk into a room and watch a teacher and we would know almost instantly there's something about that teacher that makes them effective. But it's hard.
It reminds me of your directory there, of your
right.
policy manual. You imagine how to be a good teacher in 10,000 pages. And you can have a terrible, terrible teacher perfectly on all 1,000 pages.
Yeah. No, but there are districts that have done it. And, one of my other Hoover colleagues, Rick Hanushek, has done a lot of work in Texas around, a model that they've done in Houston and Dallas, where they are finding these highly effective teachers using the evaluation system they have. And then they are funding those teachers to go into the most high need districts that they have. So they have figured out, how do we get these superstar teachers and actually put them in the districts and in the schools where they're going to be most impactful. So they've seen a lot of success with that. DC. So it can be done. There are districts that have done it, but it has proven to be a tough nut to crack. Unions are very powerful. I think in the Obama years, there was a mistake made where we were going to use student assessment data to also do teacher evaluation. There's problems with that just from even the assessment people will say, look, this is designed to assess kids. It's not designed to assess how well those kids have been taught. Like, that's a separate thing to assess. So I do think there's a lot more work that needs to be done around that. I think there's a lot of questions about how we assess teachers, but there's no question it's the biggest within school factor that determines how well kids do. And there needs to be a lot more focus on it. And again, these states that have really seen big gains, like Mississippi, they have focused on teacher training. They have focused on those ed schools. They have reworked those programs. They've aligned all the professional development. They've aligned the training materials. They have coaches in these buildings. So they've thought deeply about how to improve the capability of those teachers.
Do schools, as any state that's got a strong teachers union, which I suppose is most states, develop the ability to fire a bad teacher or to promote a really good one ahead of a more senior one who's not as good?
I would say the model that gets looked at the most is the DC model that Michelle Rhee put in a number of years ago. Impact, it's called. There's been a lot of studies done on that. They created a system that sort of had incentives in there, sort of forced teachers out, underperforming teachers sort of forced out by the system. It's been there for a while. It's hung in there. It's had some success. So it's happened in places, but it's really tough to do. Unions are extraordinarily powerful, and they are resistant to these pieces. And what's frustrating is, I think I've been really interested in some work that has been done in Louisiana, where the governor and the commissioner of education there launched this initiative called Let Teachers Teach. And they said, let's get teachers together and figure out, like, how do we make this job more workable and more rewarding for teachers? And they actually got some good feedback from teachers. Teachers said, look, we want to be evaluated. We want to be evaluated fairly, but we want to be evaluated. We don't have a problem with that. But we want really good training. We want less paperwork. We want you to do something with these kids who are real behavior problems that are disrupting our classes. We can't be mental health providers. You need to provide mental health supports for those kids that really need it. So it's an interesting document if you look at it, around how basically, we rethink how we support the teaching profession by listening to teachers. And I think if you could engage teachers in that way, I think you'd see a lot of interest from them in, how can you help me be more effective? It's not, again, as you said, it's not by doing this. It's not more of this. It's not more mandatory trainings that I have to go through. Here's the 5 mandatory trainings I have to do at back to school season every year. Like, it's not that stuff. It's how do we create?
You hear about these mandatory trainings in lots of different areas, in family services and others, where they, a bad foster parent teacher can do them. They're just a lot of time. And then you come out with this person who's maybe worse, because the really good person's like, why am I going to do a job where I've got to do these?
Yeah. Jump through these hoops. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, when you were in the LePage administration, you really narrowed down. Tell me what you started as just, here is my minimum acceptable goal.
Well, I think, it was a number of things. Obviously, Governor LePage was a huge school choice supporter. I mean, that was his thing that he wanted to swing for the fences on. He really wanted to expand school choice. Charters ended up being the sort of key element of that. We also tried to do the religious schools exemption piece that the Supreme Court ultimately ruled on here a couple of years ago. We tried to get that through the legislature with no effect. Again, I know this was exceedingly frustrating both for me and the governor, that even with Republican control of both houses of the legislature in those days, we could not make as much headway on school choice as we would have liked. That was a big feature of it. The teacher evaluation piece was another big feature. We wanted to figure out how to make sure we were getting good assessments and good evaluations of teachers. We did a lot of work on that. We also tried to do a lot around giving parents more information. We borrowed the Florida model. We did an A to F grading system where we tried to give parents more information about how their schools were doing. We built a new data system at this.
Who gave out the grades?
The department did. And believe me, it was a hugely controversial. It was a hugely controversial.
Have those people left the state?
Well, I mean, I wasn't commissioner for a whole lot longer after that. I will tell you that. And it's tough to do, right? And we used the Florida model, and it was something that we thought would be helpful in getting parents a sense of, like, what should you be looking at? I think, one of the challenges that we have is that parents don't always know how their school is doing. They don't always focus necessarily. I think we've learned from the school choice space that sometimes parents choose a school not based on academics, but based on it's close to work, or they've got a good football team, or whatever it might be. So there is a constant challenge about how do you elevate student outcomes as something for everybody, school boards too, to focus on. School boards don't pay much attention, unfortunately, the research suggests, to student outcomes. So anyway, we wanted more transparency. We did a standards revision. I mean, there were a number of things, but the idea was, let's raise our standards. Let's make sure we've got great teachers in every classroom. Let's get good information to parents, and let's create lots of opportunities for choice. We passed an innovative schools bill, which created a possibility for, this went in parallel to the charter schools bill. We had superintendents who said, look, I would like to do some innovative things. I'd like to have the kind of flexibilities that charter schools are going to have under your law. Give us some flexibility. So we did that as well. So yeah, I mean, so we really tried to, like, support innovation, but let's get really solid on standards and make sure that we're keeping student performance right in our crosshairs all the time. And I think if you're looking for why have these test scores just dropped off a cliff, I think it's because we just took our eye off the ball. It's just that academic outcome is just not the kind of focus that it was it was a decade ago.
You may have just answered my final question, but I'm serving it up anyway. We're about to have a new governor. We're a year 15 months out from the election, and a year and change out from change. What's the top page of that governor's playbook where education in Maine is concerned? What is the single biggest urgent fix? Not legislative change, not culture change, but urgent sort of turnaround moment if you were advising the next governor.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, right? What's the saying about the first step to recovery is acknowledging you have a problem? I mean, that's that we have seen these scores drop to among the lowest in the nation, and no one is talking about it. Certainly, Janet Mills is not talking about it. I haven't heard any kind of task force working group. We're going to refocus. Where is the press conference on the State House steps saying that this is a calamity that we need to address? It's a national humiliation that we've plunged like this. I don't see any action. So the first thing, if I'm the governor or whoever the governor might be, is to just say, folks, we can't do this. We're never going to build.
Call it.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to, yeah.
We suck and it's an emergency.
Well, and look, and that message can come from the government, but the message can also come from employers. I remember when I was in the legislature years ago, we went and visited the microchip plant in South Portland. And even back then, those guys were like, you guys are going to have to do something about getting these kids. So we can't maintain a microchip plant in South Portland, Maine, unless you can raise the game here. And that was 20 years ago. So there's absolutely somebody has to get their hands on the bell and just be slamming the bell back and forth around this. And then I think you can go to some of the playbook pieces that you've seen these other states like Mississippi and Alabama, laser focus on these outcomes, figuring out how to align these pieces. That's all going to be controversial because it means building capacity at the state level to do the kind of coaching and support and those kinds of things. I know my time in the department, it was tough to say we're going to keep funds at the department so we can do these supports. The folks, the Superintendent's Association, the Principals Association, they're all like, no, get that money out to the districts.
We need the money.
We need the money. If we just have more money, that will solve. We just need more money, that will solve the problem. So there's a big playbook of things, but luckily we've got states out there like ours. Like, I'm not saying we have to do it Massachusetts, like Mississippi is a state. If Mississippi can do this, we can do this. So, but it takes a determined effort. It takes somebody who's prepared to say that we face real challenges if we're going to build any prosperity for the long term in this state. We've got to turn this around and be a state where people go, wow, I can move my factory there. I can start my business there. I can raise my family there, because these are some of the best schools in the country. You could say that 30 years ago, and you can't say that now. And I don't know how that ends well for us unless that changes dramatically.
Stephen Bowen, legendary teacher, Rockport Camden Schools, Commissioner of Education for the LePage administration, and Executive Director of the Hoover Institution on School Success Initiative. Thank you very much for joining us here on Maine for Keeps.
You bet. Anytime.
Thanks for tuning in to Maine for Keeps. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow us on social media, click and share with your friends, or get on to mainforkeeps.com. If you have ideas for new content or podcast guests, or if you'd like to give us some money to support the effort, be sure to click and send. We're at team@mainforkeeps.com, and I'm at jb@mainforkeeps.com. Thanks. See you soon.